Welcome to Kai Speaks, where we explore the art and science of leadership. I'm your host, Kai, and I believe that understanding human dynamics is the key to unlocking potential for yourself, for your teams, and for your organizations. I'll be here every other week, and today I am happy to kick off this podcast with something that I know many people on both sides of the aisle are struggling with, which is what happens when somebody you know votes for the candidate you do not support. Let's take a listen.
Hi, Kai. I just learned one of my beloved colleagues voted for Trump. What are some strategies you can give for how to hold this work relationship while feeling like I can't really trust this person anymore?
Thank you so much for calling in with that question. And the first thing I want to say is, I feel you on this one. Let me give you and the other listeners some context. I'm a trans person, and in that election, the Trump campaign spent $215 million on truly horrific ads attacking the trans community. And so when I think of somebody who voted for Trump, a lot of fear comes up. I feel this tightness in my body. I can kind of get kicked into thinking the same thoughts over and over again. And so, really, my first step in answering this question, and I think probably the first step for many people who might want to stay in relationship for someone who voted the other way, whether it was for Trump or Kamala, is that ability to just notice what's happening for us internally in our body, to have some tools to breathe, to settle, right? As a human, when we feel afraid, we move into our patterns. That fight, flight, freeze, fawn, whatever they are, they all have their uses. There's all appropriate places to use them. But when we are really keyed up, we usually don't have access to our brain enough to say, is this the right strategy? Is this the strategy that's going to get me what I really want? So that first step is always like, can we care for and settle our bodies? And then after that, here are some ways I think about bridging across difference. So one is maybe this is just too big of a bridge to cross, right? And having permission to say, I don't see how we can continue this relationship. I need to protect my peace. That is always an option. And yet you describe her as a beloved colleague. So I'm hearing that at least part of you is feeling like that's not really a great option. So what do we do then? Since your question was around trust, like, how do I trust this colleague? Let's explore that for a minute. And a lot of times when we say trust, we assume that, oh, if I trust somebody, I trust them with everything. It's like complete trust. Or conversely, if I don't trust someone, I can't trust them with anything. But that's not actually how most of us move through the world most of the time. When I go out and I drive my car, these are all people I've never met, I don't know, but I am trusting them to adhere to the rules of the road. Right? And of course, I need to be vigilant and I need to watch out for somebody who runs this red light or swerved into my lane. But for the most part, I have some level of conditional trust that if you are out on the road, you will obey the rules of the law. And that allows me to not be in close relationship with these people, but in relationship enough that we can share the road. Another example I have of conditional trust is my pharmacist. I don't know this person. I see them when I go in and pick up my prescriptions, but this isn't somebody I know on a personal level at all. And yet I am actually entrusting them with my life. I'm trusting them to give me the right medication at the right dose with the right instructions so that those medications keep me healthy rather than harming me. I might not trust this pharmacist with anything else, with other personal information. I certainly wouldn't hand over my bank password and username and say, have at it. I trust you. No, we have limitations and we have boundaries on our trust. And it is absolutely okay to have conditional trust for somebody, either indefinitely or until we know they deserve a greater amount of trust. Remembering what you know of this person as a human being can sometimes be helpful in understanding that, sure, you can't trust them to vote the way that you did, but there's likely many other things that you still can trust them to do in ways that they show up for you. Another thing that helps me when I am navigating polarization, and polarization is based on what I know so far, I will trust nothing. I'm going to assume the absolute worst about you based on the stereotypes I have about people like you. And then everything that comes in, we put through the lens of a confirmation bias of like, see, I knew it all along. No matter what they say, they still show up and do this thing. So some of resettling and bringing myself down is to remember that when we are polarized, when we come across somebody who has a difference that makes a difference, we tend to assume that they are the walking stereotype that we have. So for political differences, if somebody on the right comes across somebody on the left, they would likely assume that we are all the most progressive, strident, shaming, whatever other stereotypes you have about people on the left, and assume that we agree with every single policy that progressive politicians have. And similarly, for those of us who are on the left, who are maybe Democratic or more progressive, when we come across someone on the right, we assume that they are all the most ardent of MAGA Republicans. We assume that all of them have signed off on every single item of Project 2025, right? And then we've got our other stereotypes and insults that can go along with that. But really, political beliefs come on a huge spectrum, and most of us believe in some but not all of our party's platform. Many of us voted for our candidate not because we agreed with everything, but because we thought they were the best option. Or some of us voted for our candidate because we were holding our nose and saying, I don't really like this candidate, but it's the best option I have. If we can make room for ourselves and our friends and other people within our own political party to do that, can we extend the same graciousness to the other side? And can we get curious to say, hey, maybe there's some things that we actually do have in common, even though we voted for different candidates? That can go a long way in creating some space for maintaining a relationship that you really value. And then I think the last thing I'll add is, can there be room for change? This person, they voted for Trump. Does that mean that they are going to support all of Trump's policies and actions for all time? We don't know that. They might not even know that. And I don't mean, making room for that in a way of saying, "Oh, I'm gonna love and support you despite your mistaken beliefs. I'm part of the LGBTQ community, and we get that hate the sin, love the sinner thing," and that does not feel good to be on the receiving end of that. That's not what I'm suggesting doing here, but just leaving some space for not knowing. I will say I certainly believe that things are going to get a lot worse under Trump's presidency. And my hope is that if that's true and that his policies start to negatively impact larger groups of people, there are going to be people who say, hey, wow, that's really impacting me. I am no longer with him. That is my hope. I don't know what's going to happen, but I can leave room for the fact that people are able to change their minds one way or the other. And the last thing I wanna share is one of my own experiences coming up with a a stereotype that apparently I've really enjoyed having and enjoyed leaning into. And then I met a person I really respect who embodied that stereotype. So what happened there is my property manager, I've had a good relationship with him for over a decade. There's many things he does which I really admire. He manages the building well, repairs are done in a timely manner. He rents to respectful people, and I've become friends with many of them. When there's been some sort of conflict, we've been able to talk it through really reasonably. There's been a couple times where some of the conflict has gotten escalated up to him, and he handled it in a really productive manner that allowed everyone to move forward. As a leadership coach and someone who thinks about conflict a lot, these are competencies I really value, and I know it takes a lot of emotional intelligence to be able to manage a building in the way he does. And then one day he rolls up in a cyber truck, and I apparently have been really enjoying having stereotypes about people who drive cyber trucks. And so I went through a whole process, and my first process was denial. "Oh, no, not him. He's a good guy. He can't possibly be driving that Cybertruck. Maybe it belongs to the contractor who's also here." And no, it did not belong to the contractor who was also there that day. And then I'm like, "Well, maybe he's leasing his Cybertruck," which I don't actually know how many Cybertrucks are available to be leased, but no, he's showed up on multiple occasions with the Cybertruck, so that's not it either. And so then this now leaves me to reconcile the fact that somebody I really respect drives a Cybertruck. And I'm like, "Great. Well, how am I gonna do that?" The easy one is I just write him off. I'm like, "Well, thought he was a good guy, but now I know he drives a Cybertruck, so he's dead to me." But I didn't really wanna do that because, like I said, this is over a decade that I've known him. The other thing I can do is look at that stereotype. Where does this stereotype about people who drive Cybertrucks come from? And I'm like, "Oh, it comes from the media and it comes from the internet." And I know I personally hate it when people judge me based on the worst things they've heard about people like me on the internet. And here I am doing the same exact thing to this property manager. So I had to sit with that for a while and say, okay, here's a place I'm not living up to my own values. Here's a place where I'm doing something to others that I hate when it's done to me. So maybe I can just take a deep breath and allow him to be a complex human being where there's many things that we have in common. There's many things I admire about him. And I don't have to like his choice of vehicle in order to respect him as a manager and a leader. And in fact, I would almost argue that his choice of a vehicle is not one of the most interesting or important things about him, at least if I take a breath and step back and look at it with a little bit more nuance. So that has been the work I've been doing is letting people be complex, letting people have many different facets, many different sides, and allowing them to be great property managers who drive Cybertrucks. All right, let's wrap up and I'll quickly review what we've talked about today. So, that first step is just can you settle the body and the mind enough that you can even think about what comes next? And I would love to say this is a one time activity, but we might need to revisit that multiple times as we get keyed up again. The next is, conditional trust. We might not be able to trust someone to vote the way we wanted them to, but likely there's many other things that we can continue to trust them on, especially if it's a long-standing relationship. Another one is that false polarization bias where we assume that someone who holds a different belief than us holds like the most extreme version of that belief. And for paying subscribers, I'll put some resources down regarding that false polarization bias. So that's a wrap for today. I will be back in 2 weeks. In the meantime, you can subscribe to Kai Speaks on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or become a member at kaispeaks.substack.com. Paying subscribers get exclusive content, including curated resources and references, for as little as $8 a month. And if you have a leadership challenge you'd like me to address, head on over to kaistowers.com/kaispeaks to share your question. Let's grow together.